It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
on Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs.
Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow, with you for the next 60 minutes. Matt Citak will also be joining us later on in the program, as today we're going to be focusing on 4 different Giants opponents in the upcoming season. And a reminder, you can find the archive of this show on our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcast. As we welcome you into the Giants podcast studio, it is presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. So first up, we're going to turn our attention to the New England Patriots, who the Giants will collide with on Monday Night Football in Week 13 in Foxborough, December 1st, right before the bye. And to break down New England, we bring in their radio play-by-play announcer, none other than Bob Sosi. Bob, you got Lance Medow, Paul Dottino. Good to see you. Greatly appreciate the time. Hope all is well. As everything on your end?
Yeah, things are great in these final days of summer, of course, before we begin training camp. And, you know, you're jumping ahead to the regular season meeting. I'm equally excited about that annual right of August when the Patriots play the Giants during the preseason as well. Always, a thrilling conclusion to the preseason schedule.
100%. Just not so sure if there's going to be enough of the regulars in that game, Bob, for us to dissect and break down at this point. But your point is certainly well taken. It'll be here before you know it. So I want to start with big picture perspective, Bob, with respect to the Patriots, because I see some similarities between New England and New York from the standpoint of both of these teams struggled offensively, specifically last season. We're at the bottom tier in points per game. But unlike the Giants, New England has revamped things. New coaching staff, specifically Josh McDaniels. What in your mind is Josh going to do based on his quarterback track record for a young up-and-comer like Drake May?
Yeah, and I think you really begin with Drake May. Taking a step backward, the Patriots were fortunate enough to be in the position for that third pick. And of course, the Giants reportedly had interest, as we even saw on NFL's Hard Knocks on HBO, in Drake May. So the Patriots got their quarterback, it seems. The early returns are very favorable and positive. And now combined with Josh McDaniels, of course, who helped to orchestrate the Patriots offense for so long in 2 stints as the play caller for Bill Belichick, I think what we're going to see is a lot of similarities between what Josh McDaniels did in the past, and even Brian Daboll, for example, in Buffalo with Josh Allen, but also with an influence by some of the newcomers to the Patriots staff brought on by head coach Mike Vrabel. They include former offensive coordinators elsewhere, Todd Downing, the former play caller for the Jets, being one example. And so I think you're going to see a blend primarily of McDaniels' offense, but also of the West Coast principles, including that outside zone running concept, and also getting the quarterback, given May's athletic ability, a lot of movement in the pocket and away from the pocket, which is something the Patriots haven't really had a lot of, even in the best days, of course, with Tom Brady through the years. And May showed that improvisational ability last year, the off-platform ability. But I think now he's going to do it in some ways within the structure of what McDaniels does. And Josh has been always effective, I think, at identifying and creating really opportunities to exploit offensively, mismatches with personnel groupings and motion. And we'll see a lot more of that this year.
Bob, I'm very interested in the dynamic between head coach Mike Vrabel and Josh, because when Mike Vrabel was head coach of the Titans, he had King Henry in the backfield. And we all know that meant it was going to be a run-heavy oriented offense. But with the Patriots, we think they're going to want to be a Drake May oriented offense. So how much of that old run game that Vrabel was used to having do you think we will see this year?
You know, Paul, I think it's an interesting situation because you have Vrabel, who joined the Patriots when Josh McDaniels was essentially a low man on the totem pole of the Patriots coaching staff. And of course, as Josh evolved, Mike Vrabel went on to become a star of the Patriots and then in his own right, an excellent head coach with the Tennessee Titans. And he had a lot of success as the head coach of the Titans, defending against the Patriots offense in the 2018 regular season game, and with Derrick Henry being a star of a playoff game in 2019, Tom Brady's final game as a Patriot in the wild card round of the playoffs. But I think the one thing about Josh McDaniels as well that gets lost, it's easily overlooked, is that with a game plan type approach, which the Patriots have generally had, of course, exclusively under Bill Belichick and more or less last year as well with Gerard Mayo, they will run if they feel it's the best path to success. And I think the greatest example of that in Josh McDaniels' play calling tenure was late in the 2018 season when the Patriots had lost back-to-back games. You might remember the miracle in Miami. They fell on a last-second hook and lateral at the Dolphins. Well, they rebounded from that game along with another close loss at Pittsburgh by essentially becoming a run first and run predominantly team late in the regular season. They carried that into the playoffs, rolled past the Chargers in the divisional round, and then ran the ball extensively against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship before Brady had to win it in overtime with his arm to Gronkowski and Edelman. So McDaniels has shown that flexibility and a willingness to run it if that's what he has to do as a play caller. And I think, again, that knowledge that Mike Vrabel has with Josh McDaniels going back to the early days of Josh's NFL coaching career is really important here. There's a relationship that they've been able to build on, and I think it's led to a smooth transition with Josh coming back to New England this offseason.
Bob, how much does that tie into also one of the themes that it appeared that they focused on this offseason was revamping the offensive line, which goes twofold. Obviously, you want to protect Drake May, but to your point, maybe you want to establish the run using a first-round pick on Will Campbell, Garrett Bradbury, Morgan Moses, two polished veterans. How does that enter the equation of what you were just talking about in terms of the focus of the offensive philosophy?
Yeah, Lance, run or pass. For the last several years, the Patriots' offensive line, once a strength in great part due to Dante Scarnecchia, but also Brady's ability in the pocket to quickly exploit matchups. It really took a lot of pressure off the offensive line, not to take anything away from them. But the last few years, the offensive line has been really a train wreck for the Patriots, and last year was the nadir for New England. And they had to address that in multiple ways through free agency. You mentioned Bradbury and Moses. And I think they also tried to do it through trades in the last couple of years, successfully for some maybe depth players, unsuccessfully for a frontline tackle. And so they drafted Will Campbell, and I think that was a pick that really generated a lot of pre-draft debate, even in New England. Outside of the Patriots hierarchy, they were set on Campbell from the start, even though there are questions about whether or not he can play left tackle in the NFL. He certainly is going to get that opportunity with New England. And whether or not he is a long-term left tackle or eventually has to move to left guard, right now he is clearly the best option for them. But that's not the only position of need on that offensive line. There were a lot of holes for the Patriots up front. And I think, again, to take it back to Josh McDaniels, what we didn't see last year in the West Coast offense of Alex Van Pelt was allocating extra bodies to help overmatch left tackle or right tackle. So the Patriots, I think, are going to do more with an extra tight end, primarily as a blocker, or maybe with the back helping out, chipping more, adding pass protection, another layer for them. And that's, again, part of McDaniels' past. And I think it's going to be part of his future going forward this season. But this is an offense that had a lot of holes at wide receiver. And I think at running back, there is certainly a lot of depth issues for them across the board in all positions. But offensive line is where they had to start in this draft.
Yeah, I want to stick with the offense one more second here, Bob. Travion Henderson, the second-round pick out of Ohio State, was a big-time college player. Does he immediately become an impact guy in that room?
Paul, I hope so. I think so. And I think, of the few things you really can tell from non-padded practices in a passing camp like OTAs, you look at a variety of things that players can do athletically, and he's one guy that really stood out, I think, to just about anybody watching. By all accounts, in print and on air, he was really one of the studs of the OTA session for the Patriots, just in terms of his ability to burst after the catch. And he comes into the NFL with not only great numbers from college, but I think also something that often young backs lack when they make that jump from the college game to the NFL: experience, and as well, I'll say production based on his film grades, I'm sure. his ability to pass protect, his understanding of that concept as a running back in this league and how important it is. And I think, again, McDaniels will try to utilize him in a lot of ways, the same way he did with James White, the same way he did with the ex-Giant Shane Vereen when he was instrumental in the Patriots' success against the Seahawks in Super Bowl 49.
One last one for you, Bob, on the offensive side of the ball. Wide receiver, you had alluded to, was also an area of focus and goes back to the time where Brady was still playing. That would be the narrative, right? Hovering over New England. Does he have reliable targets? Well, they brought in Stephon Diggs, who is coming off of injury, but curious the personality that Diggs brings to the table, both on and off the field, Bob, because as you well know, based on your facial expression reaction, a lot has been made out of that. But I find it interesting because Vrabel's that personality that is played. He understands what needs to be brought to the locker room, how those dynamics you think will mesh, and what Diggs could provide, still a young quarterback in Drake May, in being that reliable intermediary in terms of maybe not having to go for the home run constantly throughout the field.
Absolutely. You know, before I get to the physical part of it and what he could add as a receiver for the Patriots, I'll go to that facial expression because I was thinking immediately of a viral video of Stephon Diggs on a boat party with Cardi B, his significant other, I believe still, that, you know, really caused Mike Vrabel some consternation early in the Patriots OTAs. Diggs handed a substance that was unidentified, unknown to some party goers on that boat, raised a lot of questions, and certainly caused several days of chatter on sports talk radio here in New England. And Vrabel, you know, addressed it, and Diggs was back in practice. He was at practice and participating for the first time shortly thereafter. And frankly, despite coming off a torn ACL in the middle of last season, again, through the OTAs, based on what we could see, he looked exceptionally athletic, quick. He was able to cut, stop on a dime, and change direction with an ability that we haven't seen, frankly, by a Patriots receiver in a long time, maybe not since Julian Edelman, with those kind of route running skills. So he looks the way he says he is ahead of schedule. But there are a lot of questions. It didn't end well in Minnesota in terms of his relationship with the team, nor in Buffalo. Houston, it seemed to go better, but it was only a half season before the injury cut short that campaign. But the one thing is there's constant production, 1,000 yards, 100 catches, even last year, on pace for those numbers with the Texans. And this team desperately needs that. He doesn't have maybe the high-end speed, especially at his age, of some other players the Patriots had considered going after in recent years. Last year, they made a play for Calvin Ridley in the offseason. But I think he can bring a lot of things to this team, especially for somebody that he's got a 3-year deal, but you know, he's really playing beyond year one for beyond year one of this contract. And thus far, when he has been present, all reports are that he's been a positive influence on the young wide receivers. And that's something they've desperately needed. But we'll see how it goes, Lance and Paul, as the season progresses. You know, if there's one of those games or a stretch of games where he's not getting the ball thrown his way to his liking, we'll see how it shakes out, because, you know, obviously, you know, that has been something that's followed him in his career from Minnesota to Buffalo.
Bob, we've spent most of our time talking about the offense, but I thought it was interesting when I looked at the Patriots defense. I saw they spent money and went and get guys at every single level, whether it was Milton Williams along the line, Harold Landry and the linebacking core, or Carlton Davis back in the secondary. It was obvious a point of emphasis for them to get guys who were experienced producers so that they could insert them immediately into the lineup.
Yeah, Paul, I think they're going to try to play a little bit different defensively. We'll see less of the 2-gap, presumably, up front. So you want a guy like Williams. Hopefully, from the Patriots' perspective, he can increase his snap count and be as productive as he was in Philadelphia, where he also had a lot of other outstanding linemen to take away some of the attention that he's going to get, certainly for New England. But I think the Patriots look at him alongside Christian Barmore, presuming that Barmore, coming off blood clots, continues on a healthy path toward the start of this season. He's an explosive player with a lot of athletic ability, and Williams is that type of guy as well. And I think they're going to look to penetrate more with those two people up front, alongside a guy like Landry, who Mike Vrabel knows exceptionally well, he and his staff. The defensive staff for this team is predominantly coaches who've worked with Mike in the past in Tennessee and have a lot of experience with Harold Landry. On the other side, you've got an underrated guy, in my opinion, in Anthony Jennings, who kind of does yeoman's work and has done that for the Patriots. And really a wild card of sorts, Keon White for them, who has the ability to be an explosive pass rusher. But I think last year, after 5.5 sacks in the first 2 weeks of the season, really didn't have much help to take some of that attention away from him that he was constantly attracting from teams week in, week out. And then you mentioned the back end. Now you have Carlton Davis, who, if healthy, gives them a second shutdown cornerback to complement the up-and-coming, and if not already here, Christian Gonzalez, who cracked the top 100 of the NFL, their first-round pick from a couple of years ago. And then in between, they added Robert Spillane, another former Vrabel Tennessee Titan, who really came out as a Las Vegas Raider with outstanding numbers the last couple of years, and I think brings leadership to the linebacking core. The defense was considered the strength of the team the last couple of years, but frankly, in critical moments 2 years ago under Bill Belichick, it disappointed. Last year, it really was not consistently a good unit for this team, and they have really turned things over from top to bottom with few exceptions.
Well, as a follow-up to that point, the one number that at least jumped off the page to me from last season was only 28 sacks, and that was the lowest total in the NFL. Now, as you well know and Paul well knows, that doesn't always tell the story. Quarterback hits, pressures also go into that. But why was getting to the quarterback and finishing such a prevalent issue? And how much do you think, to your point, adding volume up front will actually correct that?
Yeah, Lance, I think there's a number of factors that are involved in the lack of pass pressure last year. When you had Belichick departing as the Patriots head coach, and I don't mean that as a shot at Gerard Mayo and his staff, but you had a first-time defensive play caller in DeMarcus Covington who was in that role, and I think he tried to simulate a lot of the things the Patriots were doing in the past, but they didn't have the personnel necessarily to do it. And obviously, you lose a half century's worth of defensive knowledge and ingenuity with the head coach, Bill Belichick, in that room when they formulate a game plan, even though he had defensive coordinators like Matt Patricia, along with Brian Flores, who were able to craft very good game plans as well. I think beyond that, you look at the loss of Barmore to blood clots. And then I think just the inconsistency, the linebacker position for them was really a weak area overall. I think the secondary struggled. A guy that's been sorely missed, in my opinion, and quietly so, considering the attention that's paid elsewhere, is Devin McCourty in retirement. A free safety who didn't make a lot of sensational plays in the eyes of his critics, but he prevented so many that we'll never know about, I think, in the eyes of his coaches and teammates with his range at free safety. They really lacked that last year. They lost Jabril Peppers as well because of an off-the-field incident. And in his case, he was really a tough presence in the secondary, as you guys know, who also brought some leadership. And the leadership issue is something that's been really interesting to watch unfold this year and how it's been addressed by Vrabel and his staff, because the Patriots had a number of guys who were in line to return as veterans, players who were on championship teams in the past, in some cases multiple championship teams. And it seems like Vrabel was intent, whether it was their performance or simply just seeking a fresh start, to clear a lot of those guys out of here and bring in new players to set a new tone, build a new culture, and really give them the opportunity across the board to emerge as the leaders of this team. So there's been quite a transformation in a lot of ways culturally, but as well schematically for the Patriots. And I think it's really evident on defense.
Bob, we only have about a minute left. I want to ask you about special teams. Knowing Vrabel's background, I'd be shocked if he's not putting a heavy emphasis on that this season.
No question, Paul. And, special teams for me, it's an area, first of all, that's I find especially fascinating. And I think it's completely overlooked by most fans and observers in our world at times. But we saw the results in the last couple of years when you have a poor special teams unit for your football team. And Belichick, who had a great quarterback, an all-time great quarterback in Brady, and these great defenses and defensive schemes, he still spent a lot more and put a lot more resources into special teams. And generally, the Patriots won that matchup week in, week out. And it was a critical difference maker in a lot of big games, including Super Bowl 53. And I think Vrabel has that same understanding because, as you said, I mean, his early career as a Pittsburgh Steeler, he stayed in the league and played on special teams. And then as a Patriot, continued to do that. Even in practices, guys would talk about Vrabel jumping in on scout team reps or on special teams to wreak havoc with his teammates in practice. And he has that mentality as a head coach. I think he knows how it can go when you don't have a good special teams unit based on his final couple of seasons with Tennessee. The Patriots had to address place kicking. They drafted Andy Borregales out of Miami. The last couple of years, for a team that had Adam Vinatieri, Stephen Gostkowski, and Nick Folk, it has been the cause of a lot of close losses, including, I think, that game against the Giants a couple of years ago, and the Patriots lost to Tommy DeVito. Missed field goal early by Chad Ryland really set the tone for that game, and that was a constant occurrence for them in a season in which they lost about a half dozen games by a touchdown or less. So they had to address special teams. They also have a new long snapper, which was interesting. Julian Ashby replaces the two-time Super Bowl champion, Joe Cardona, and I think that's a sign, too, of kind of want to changing the culture in New England and taking a guy that has been an old world leader, if you will, for the Patriots, letting him go to bring in a draft choice from Vanderbilt and Julian Ashby.
Quite the track record when it comes to the kicking game for the New England Patriots. And who knows, Bob, based on how both of these teams square off with one another, maybe we're in store for another interesting ending in Week 13, Monday Night Football. The Giants visit the Patriots in Foxborough. That is going to be December 1st, right before the bye. He is Bob Socci, Patriots radio play-by-play announcer, joining us here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Bob, greatly appreciate the time and insight and look forward to seeing you later this season.
Likewise, Lance and Paul. You guys take care. We'll see you soon.
You as well. So from the Patriots, we now turn our attention to the Lions. The Giants will travel to Motown to battle Detroit in Week 12, November 23rd. And to delve into the Lions and discuss what to expect from this squad this season, we bring in John Macaroon, publisher of Detroit Lions on Sports Illustrated, founder of Detroit Sports Podcast Network. John, you got Lance Medow, Paul Dottino here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Everything's great. It's a big year for the Detroit Lions, hoping to rebound after a disappointing playoff loss to the Commanders. You look at the Detroit Lions, and there's been, a little bit of an overhaul of the coaching staff. But when you look at it, you guys know the talent level that Brad Holmes has assembled has really put the Detroit Lions in a position to compete every single year.
Glad you brought up the changes with the coaching staff because that's where I want to begin this dialogue. It's probably the most notable change, the fact that they've got a new offensive coordinator in John Morden, who had a little history with Detroit for our audience to understand. In 2022, he was on staff before he went to the Broncos. And then Kelvin Shepard, who was already on staff as the linebackers coach, is now going to replace Aaron Glenn. How do you see the dynamics of the schemes, I guess, John, changing with these new faces at the helm?
Yeah, no doubt. And I do think that one thing that has been maybe overlooked by a lot of people is that Dan Campbell has a lot of input in the development of the coaching staff, has assembled a coaching staff that is chock full of former NFL players. And Kelvin Shepard is one of them. He's been identified pretty early in the Dan Campbell regime as somebody that could potentially be a coordinator and eventually one day be an NFL head coach. And so he worked his way up from a position coach and now is the new Detroit Lions defensive coordinator. But under the tutelage of Aaron Glenn, I do think that this defense is going to continue to be aggressive. You're going to see multiple looks up front, and you have the returning Aiden Hutchinson. So Kelvin Shepard is probably, now you probably look at it from the perspective of he was a former linebacker. So I expect a lot of pressure from Sam linebackers. I expect the development of Jack Campbell and Derek Barnes to continue to maybe be even more of a factor in this defense. Whereas Aaron Glenn was a defensive back, so maybe you saw a lot more pressure from Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, emerging safeties. But now I do expect Kelvin Shepard to have his own imprint on this defense, but maybe you probably naturally would assume a lot more impact from the linebacker position.
Well, John, let's stick with that defense because we all know Hutchinson went down with the broken leg last October. Derek Barnes, who's not a household name, he wound up significantly busting up his knee last September. So you didn't have those two guys for most of the season. Then Ali McNeil goes down back in December with an ACL. Now, I know he's not a household name, but again, he's a good player and a big part of that front. So where's the health of these three guys as they go into training camp?
Yeah, you look at it and you probably are going to presume that Aleem McNeil, Malcolm Rodriguez, a young emerging linebacker as well, and those two probably will start the year on the PUP list. Derek Barnes should be ready to go. I expect him to be a participant at training camp. We've got a chance to see him this spring. Yeah, one of the factors for the Lions this year is hopefully the defense being able to stay a lot more healthy than they were last year. But what was fascinating last year, guys, is that the Lions dealt with over a dozen guys on the IR, but still were able to win 15 games. So that just speaks to Dan Campbell's coaching staff and his ability to have his message resonate. But one of the things everyone's looking forward to is the return of Aiden Hutchinson and his ability potentially to be a defensive player of the year candidate. But most people expect Aleem McNeil to return in probably the second half of the season. And Derek Barnes, yes, with a new contract expected to continue his development. And I think many people see him as a comfortable Sam linebacker who can, just like he did in college, pressure the quarterback, can be another factor that can help Aiden Hutchinson and that defensive line when he has a chance to line up on the edge.
Marcus Davenport's another name I would throw out there who also got hurt back in week 3 with the triceps injury. To your point, injuries all across the board. I want to stay, though, on that subject in terms of potential balance this year, John, because you mentioned Dan Campbell is heavily involved in game plan, and we know he's aggressive. He'll keep his offense out there for every fourth down humanly possible, but if the defense, assuming it stays healthier this season, how much better balance do you anticipate? And could that influence Dan Campbell's aggressiveness in how he approaches games?
Yeah, no doubt. And it's really a fascinating look at Dan Campbell and how he's taken the tutelage from from other coaches and the ability that you realize that this is a coach that wants to be aggressive when you have such great offensive talent. And you realize, okay, it's one of those deals where Sean Payton really instilled the ability to be aggressive, to use analytics in order to really showcase that, hey, if you stay on the field with your offense, you have a chance to excel. So I don't know if I really believe that Dan Campbell will be less aggressive when you have great offensive weapons like a Jahmyr Gibbs, who's expected to really be somebody to produce maybe even 1,000 yards receiving and 1,000 yards rushing. But to your point, there is more confidence, I believe, in the defense when you have young defensive backs and Terry and Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw who are expected to take strides forward. They brought in DJ Reed from the Jets, as you guys know, and you realize, okay, even though they lost Carlton Davis, bringing in DJ Reed, some may view as even an upgrade. And yeah, it does make it a little bit more interesting in terms of decisions when you can count on your defense. But guys, you know this, or maybe you guys don't with the offense that I've seen from the Giants. It's an offensive league. And with Dan Campbell and the ability to score, this was one of the highest scoring offenses last year, guys. And when you realize the way in which the offensive line was built, the confidence that he had, it would behoove Dan Campbell to go for it a little bit more because of the fact that you have a veteran in Jared Goff, you have one of the premier quarterbacks in the league, you have a decent offensive line that's going to be featuring younger talent, but arguably one of the best right tackles in the league. And if it's 4th and 2, 4th and 1, I still see Dan Campbell being quite aggressive and really taking it to opponents.
You know, John, it seems to me that the Lions have such a terrific roster on both sides of the ball. They had the luxury when they got to pick in the draft at number 28 of just taking the best guy on the board. And Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State, that guy is a force. How quickly are they going to try to get him some snaps?
Very quickly. I think that he's probably projected to be a day one starter along with Tate Ratledge. Those are the two guys, early picks, that we project to have the most impact for the Detroit Lions sooner rather than later. And you realize what some of the strengths he brings. And one of the key facets that Brad Holmes has kind of now started to divulge in terms of his overall philosophy is he definitely values the interior of the defensive line. Whereas all us fans and reporters are like, let's look at Aiden Hutchinson, let's look at Marcus Davenport, let's look at the defensive ends. He's like, guys, really, when you look at it, if you don't have strength in the interior, teams are just going to run all over you. And so what Brad Holmes has decided is that, hey, we want to make sure that we have veterans like DJ Reader, bringing in a young draft pick in Tyleik Williams from Ohio State. So clearly, the Big Ten is right in Brad Holmes' backyard. So he had a chance to go to Ann Arbor and check out Ohio State quite a bit. He was there probably scouting a lot of the Michigan players as well, but he definitely got a firsthand look at Tyleik Williams. And one of the first things that he does is he can stop the run. He's a run stuffer, and the belief is that with development with the new defensive line coach in Casey Rogers, there will be development in his pass rush. But first and foremost, the Lions want run-stuffing big men, and I do think he'll acclimate quickly and be an impact player in the Detroit Lions defense.
John, this conversation is music to Paul's ears. We're talking about the trenches. This is right up his alley. On a more serious note, you could argue the Lions, I would say, have been defined by play in the trenches, right? You alluded to earlier, they have had one of the best offensive lines in football, and of course, the ability to get after the quarterback. What I don't think is being talked enough about, though, All-Pro center Frank Ragnow abruptly retires last month, okay? That has been a staple of their line. Kevin Zeitler, who Giants fans saw up close and personal a few seasons ago, and that was a significant loss when he moved on. He signs with Tennessee. I'm not saying that they don't have reserves, John, but those are two notable losses up front on the offensive line to establish the run and pass protection. How do you see that impacting the flow of play up front?
Yeah, and this is now going to be one of the first tests we get to see in terms of Brad Holmes restocking talent. First round, the first wave of his first couple years, he identified a lot of talent because the Lions were drafting a little bit higher. Now, the last couple years with success, having been to the NFC Championship game, now back-to-back division winners, now we're going to get a chance to see how does Brad Holmes and the front office personnel go out and scout talent at the lower ends of the draft. But they've pretty much had a clue that maybe Frank Ragnow was on the tail end of his career because last year they went out and drafted a couple linemen in Christian Mahogany, who figures to be a starting left guard. Many people are very high on him. And Giovanni Manu, a developmental project, who figures to maybe be a tackle of the future. And then this year, two more offensive linemen drafted in Tate Ratledge, who's going to compete to be the starting center or at right guard, and Miles Frazier, the stout, talented right guard out of LSU. So Brad Holmes understands, hey, you know what? Where are the best college football players in the SEC? And he's targeted quite a bit of offensive linemen that project to help out. And then here's the key, too, in regards to going back to the coaching staff. Hank Fraley earned interviews this year for offensive coordinator position out there in Seattle, and he's widely regarded as one of the great offensive line coaches in the league and probably is a future potential offensive coordinator who made the decision to come back to Detroit. And so just based on the development of Penei Sewell and the development of the young offensive linemen, I expect there to be continued success. It might take a little bit of time early to gel, but absolutely the run game is going to be a strong facet of Dan Campbell's offense always.
John, it's funny. Over the last couple of years, Goff has been as efficient and as productive as any quarterback in this league. There's no question about that. But when people talk about the superstar quarterbacks, his name doesn't usually come off the tongue like Patrick Mahomes does. What does he do over these last 2 years? What has he done to be that good, that consistently? And is there any way to expect that there'll be any drop-off?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing. John Morton was a key factor in installing the offense that Ben Johnson ran. Now, the question mark is going to be, how does Morton call games at certain spots? How does he deploy the weapons, the vast number of weapons the Lions have? And you look at Jared Goff, and many people thought once he was traded that his skill set would erode. But coming to Detroit, what Ben Johnson gets a lot of credit for is, and the front office personnel staff is crafting an offense that suits the skills of the signal caller. What a novel idea. Look at what your quarterback does well and highlight that. Maybe other teams could take a page from the Detroit Lions. And here's what Jared Goff does well. He's, really, first and foremost, a competitor, gritty, probably took great offense to being discarded by the Rams. And he comes in and he actually worked to get better. And across the board, in terms of scanning the field, reading defenses, understanding what's in front of him, I do think that he improved in every facet of the game. And here's what the issue is in regards to kind of talk outside of Detroit. Just the growing nature now, you guys know, the quarterbacks that get a lot of attention are those that are a little bit more mobile, a little bit more flashy. Jared Goff is a prototypical pocket passer. And those, it's a great thing to have. But you guys know that with collapsing pockets and these defensive ends getting bigger, stronger, faster, unfortunately, he's a statue out there at times. But you got to give him credit. Against the blitz and against pressure, he's one of the great quarterbacks in terms of knowing exactly where his receivers need to be. And when you have an Amon-Ra St. Brown who runs routes at the best rate there in terms of his route tree and crispness, I think what Jared Goff was able to do was really highlight the strengths of his accuracy, his ability to get the ball out quickly, and to be in the face of pressure, understanding where his receivers need to be in terms of hot routes and getting the ball out quickly. And what really, in the end, guys, in the keep it simple model of football, what he got better at is he reduced the turnovers, and he became a lot better at securing the football, and he became really a glorified, really upper level game manager. And I know a lot of people think that's insulting, but in the end, if the name of the game is to score a lot of points and lead your offense, Jared Goff has been able to do that at a high rate. Now, this year, it's going to be one of the question marks we all wonder is, what's the drop? What's the level of the offense going to look like with new leadership? But guys, Jared Goff is surrounded by some of the best talent that you could ask for in regards to Jamison Williams, one of the speediest wide receivers out there, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has emerged as one of the best receivers. So I don't expect a big drop-off, but it'll be interesting to see how the calls look in regards to how many deep shots they take.
Yeah, he's certainly not lacking targets. It'll just be interesting whether or not he intentionally trips over himself to then catch the Bears defense off guard and throw down the field like we saw under Ben Johnson's leadership. That maybe is the only thing to look out for. Giants traveling to Motown to battle the Lions in Week 12, November 23rd. Should be a good one. He's John Macaroon, publisher of Detroit Lions on Sports Illustrated, founder of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. John, really appreciate the time and the insight and look forward to seeing you down the road next season.
Thanks,
no
John.
doubt about it. I'm also looking forward to seeing Brian Daboll and how he works with the young quarterback. Also, Brian Daboll, former Michigan State coaching assistant there. So go green as always.
The connections are across the board. They are galore. Well, coming up on Big Blue Kickoff Live, we'll turn our attention to the NFC North as Paul Dottino and Matt Citak take you through the Bears and the Packers. Stay tuned.
And now it's time to preview the Chicago Bears. On Week 10, November 9th, Chicago will be hosting the New York Football Giants. Zach Pearson from BearReport.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network, joins us. And Zach, thanks so much for taking the time today. You're talking about a Bears team out there that was 5-12 last season, wound up getting their head coach fired, and Ben Johnson comes over where he really did great things for that Detroit offense. What can we expect from him and the Bears this year?
Yeah, it's funny because we have this little saying here in Chicago where the Bears are back-to-back-to-back offseason champions, but it hasn't really translated to the field. This year, I think it's a little different. I think the excitement is warranted just because last year they did something they've never done in their franchise history by firing a head coach mid-season, Matt Eberflus. Not only that, but then they went out a couple months later and got arguably the top coaching candidate. So with Ben Johnson, you're going to look at an offense under Caleb Williams going into year 2 that needs to take the next step. There's a lot of weapons. They've built this offense around Caleb Williams. There really should be no excuses this year. It's time for Caleb Williams to pay off that investment. And I think we're going to see a better quarterback. I think we're going to see an offense a little similar to what we saw in Detroit, a lot of 12 personnel, want to use DeAndre Swift, want to use their tight ends, but they also have weapons on the outside with Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Colson Loveland. They took at number 10, and they took a wide receiver in Luther Burden, who a lot of people thought could have been a first-round pick. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a better offense, maybe a little bit more of explosive offense this year for the Bears.
Yeah, and so between the additions of Ben Johnson, all those playmakers on offense, along with the offensive linemen the Bears went and acquired, I guess what are the expectations for Caleb Williams in year 2? And also, how did he look throughout the spring practices?
I'd say the expectations are elevated. He has to take that next step. He has to show improvement. And I think when you watch Jaden Daniels now being called a top 10 quarterback, and Bo Nix got his team to the playoffs, I think that kind of ramps up the expectations a little bit just because he was the number 1 overall pick. So being more consistent, being better with his deep throws, I think those are kind of things he needs to work on. But in terms of what I've seen this spring, it's hard to fully judge when they're not in pads, but we've kind of seen what we saw all last year where he can make these spectacular plays on the run, out of the pocket. He's been a little more consistent, but there's also been times where he'll be bad on accuracy or he'll bail the pocket a little too early. When it gets to pads and everything like that, it'll be a better judgment. But I think so far they're trying to work on mechanical things, mental things with Caleb Williams, and we've actually seen a change in his lead foot when he takes the snap. I forgot if he went left to right or right to left, but he's now back doing what he was doing in college, which was a little interesting to me.
A lot of times young quarterbacks, Zach, will take too much time holding the ball, and they'll be as responsible for sacks as the offensive line will. But I think it's quite obvious any team with a losing record needs to improve its offensive line. There's been a lot of retooling going on there. Who is the most important key? Obviously, we talk about left tackle, but of the changes, what has to work on that line for them?
I think it's center. I think it's a position where they've been searching for a center since, Cody Whitehair kind of was getting injured in 2017, 2018. They just haven't been able to find a legit center. You talked about they went out and got, Joe Tooney and Jonah Jackson on the trade market. But then right away in free agency, they signed Drew Dahlman, which kind of felt like the worst kept secret in the league to anyone paying attention to it. But I think Dahlman's going to be the key. He's still a little bit younger. Last year, the Bears just didn't have any consistency at the center position. Now, their whole offensive line was a mess, but, high snaps, the cadence and the timing wasn't there with Caleb Williams. I think he's the most important piece because you have him, on a 3 to 4 year deal, I believe it is. So he could kind of be Caleb Williams's center for the future, and having that consistency in that relationship, that's going to be very important. Because we've just seen too many times over the years the pressure get up the middle, with game records on the interior defensive line that there's have had to go against. Their centers have literally had no chance at all. It's been pretty bad.
Yeah, so going into his rookie year, one of the reasons why Caleb Williams, in addition to just being the top pick, had so much hype around him was because of all the pieces around him, and especially the wide receivers. Now, Keenan Allen is no longer in Chicago, but as you mentioned, the Bears drafted Luther Burden. It's now year 2 of Rome Odunze, and of course, DJ Moore is still there. Then you throw in Colston Loveland. So what do you think the ceiling is for all of these, for all of these offensive playmakers around Caleb Williams?
Yeah, I think the ceiling for the offense is a top 10 offense, maybe top 5 if everything clicks. It was interesting. They went Colston Loveland, which a lot of people thought Tyler Warren was probably the pick at number 10. But look at the tape. He just kind of makes more sense for what Ben Johnson wants to do. He's got that Sam Laporta comp, more natural pass catcher, I think, than even what they have in Cole Kmet. The interesting guy to me is Luther Burden. We know now that the Bears really like Travion Henderson. He went 1 pick ahead of them to the Patriots, and they ended up with Luther Burden, and they're not complaining. I mean, like I said, he's a first-round talent. We haven't seen much of him on the field, but I'm curious to see how this is going to work with those 3 guys. They went out and signed Zacchaeus. They signed Devin Duvernay. They have a couple guys that can fit in that wide receiver 3 role, but for Luther Burden, it's interesting because he's kind of a different style wide receiver than DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. He's more explosive after the catch, and then Odunze and Moore, different respectively in their own ways. But I think he can add another dynamic to this offense. So in terms of ceiling overall for all these guys, I think they could have top 3 receiving core in the league, top 4 if everything clicks. I'd say offense as a whole, like I said, probably top 10-ish.
All right, Jack, I'm going to address the defensive personnel, or maybe even let Matt do that in a moment. I want to first go to Dennis Allen, coming over from, we know he was the head coach at New Orleans. He's now the new defensive coordinator. So just reserve this to schematically speaking. What do you expect to be different? And is he going to be able to do a lot of improving with a defense that may not have as many bodies as one would like?
Yeah, he was my favorite hire of the offseason. He's great. In terms of his scheme, I think they're going to be playing more man-to-man coverage, which we didn't really see a lot under Matt Eberflus. It was a little more zone-based at times. With Dennis Allen, I don't think you're going to blitz a lot. I think he just wants to have his corners out there, go out there and prove it. Tyreek Stevenson, a defensive back, had a great quote on it. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, essentially saying, Dennis Allen lets us go make our money. Defensive backs make our money in man coverage, and that's what we like out there. They have the personnel to do that, too. They have Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon. It's as good of a three defensive backs in terms of starting that you're going to see in the NFL. So yeah, I think it'll be more man coverage in the secondary. I think it'll be different disguises up front. Maybe not a lot of blitzing, but maybe moving some guys in the line. Someone like Gervon Dexter has played inside. Maybe he goes to the outside on a couple plays. And I actually think, we're going to see a little bit more three linebacker sets than people expect. It's not going to be a huge amount because they do want to use the nickel and Kyler Gordon, which is also another. I mean, we could see Kyler Gordon at safety too. That's what they hinted at earlier in the offseason. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more man-to-man coverage and just trusting his guys in that back end of the defense.
So sticking with the defense, I feel like last year the Bears defense was, a little mixed bag of results. The pass defense played a little better. The rush defense, though, really did struggle. And it seemed like Ryan Poles, went into the offseason trying to address that with the additions of Grady Jarrett, Dayo Adebingo, and then drafting Shamar Turner. So how much better do the Bears expect the run defense to be this year with those additions and, of course, with Dennis Allen as well?
Yeah, I think it's going to be better. And another reason would be they're getting Andrew Billings back. If you watch when Andrew Billings went out, I think it was week 3 or 4, their defensive line just pretty much went downhill. Gervon Dexter had 4 or 5 games where he was just looked like a star on that defensive line. And when Billings went out, it impacted him because he was getting double teamed. So I think the addition of Andrew Billings will help as well, getting him back. They're going to have to be better in the run game. You look at last year's tape, and I know a lot of things happened. The whole Washington Hail Mary thing, and pretty much getting letting Arizona run all over them a couple weeks later. You watch that San Francisco game; it looked like they flat out quit. I mean, they just let the 49ers run all over them. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think with the additions they have and how Dennis Allen is going to use those guys, I think they'll be better way up front, especially in that run defense.
Does you mentioned Zacchaeus before? Does he become part of the kick return team on specials or no?
I think it'd be more Devin Duvernay. Zacchaeus, he might, but they also, if Tyler Scott makes the roster, he'll be another guy that's out there. They actually have a couple guys, but I'd probably say Devin Duvernay is ahead of him right now.
Just finally, just considering how tough the NFC North is overall, what are expectations overall for the Bears this season?
Yeah, it's tough. I think, like we've been talking, they've made so many moves to help Caleb Williams. They just extended Ryan Poles. They brought in Ben Johnson. So it kind of feels like playoffs are bust. But I don't think 8 to 9 wins in this division is disappointing. This is a really tough division. The Lions, who knows what's going to happen after losing all those assistant coaches. But you have guys like, and I said this before. I think J.J. McCarthy and Caleb Williams are 2 of, if not the 2 most important players in that division. Because if both are good and both can take that next step in their career, and obviously, McCarthy's first season starting, I think the Vikings and Bears will be so much better. The biggest question mark to me is going to be Green Bay. I don't know kind of what to expect from them. I don't know if Xavier McKinney is going to get them 6, 7, 8 more interceptions like he did last year. But I think the Bears, I think the expectation should be 8 to 9. Just be in that playoff race, that wild card race at the end. And 8 to 9 wins in this division is pretty darn good, especially after winning 5, all what happened last year.
Zach, everybody has optimism in July and August. Where can people read your stuff as the Giants fans get closer to that game and want to know what's going on in Chicago?
Yeah, you can read my work at bearreport.com. I'm also on Twitter at Zach, ZACK_Pearson. Tons of coverage. We're already ramping up for training camp next week. So thank you guys so much.
Zach Pearson, thank you so much for joining us. And now it's time to talk about the Green Bay Packers. Week 11, November 16th at MetLife Stadium. They will come here to visit the New York Giants. We talked to Peter Bukowski of The Leap out there in Wisconsin. Peter, thanks for joining us. And, you're talking about a team that was 11-6 last year, lost to Philadelphia on the road in the wild card game. But I have to imagine the Packers are thinking they're going to go a heck of a lot further this year, no?
Well, it's still going to matter what the matchups are, right? It always is going to matter what those matchups are. And so you face the Philadelphia Eagles in the first round, you're going to have a tough time again. But that's why you have to win your division. And that was the problem for the Packers last year. 1-5 in divisional games, and they were a Carl Brooks fingertip in the other Bears game from losing that game from 0-6. And they were also very close to beating the Lions. They were close to beating the Vikings in those games. Close doesn't count. Close as this is not horseshoes or hand grenades, Paul. So you have to find ways to win those games. In 2023, they were able to do it. In 2024, for whatever reason, they weren't. And so it's that situational football. Brian Gutekunst said at the end of last season, he wants to see Jordan Love control the game a little bit more. The best quarterbacks in the NFL in the fourth quarter, they find a way, right? The Mahomes, the Allens, the Jacksons, the Burrows, they find a way. The Packers, I don't know that they need Jordan Love to do that every week, but there are times when they need him to control the game a little bit more. That's the next step in the evolution for Jordan Love. And the Packers think he can get there. I think he can get there.
I'm glad you brought up Jordan Love. That's where I was going to start. You know, his first season as a starter, he looked great out there. Last year seemed like he took a little bit of a step back. Why exactly do you think that might have happened? And how did he look throughout the spring heading into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I think some of the weirdness of last year was based on the injury. He goes to Brazil, and I believe he tweaked his something in his lower body early in that game. If you recall, the footing in that Brazil game, they played on an ice skating rink. In that game, everyone was slipping everywhere the whole game. He slipped early on a drop back, trying to plant his back foot, and he starts throwing these fadeaway jumpers, which is a Jordan Love thing. He'll hit his back foot, not transition his weight, and he's able to make these throws because his arm is just that good. And then at the end of that game, he has an MCL injury. He comes back 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later against the Minnesota Vikings, does not look the same, starts to work his way back, and then as a part of a compensation problem, I actually spoke to one of his physio folks about this. He pulls his groin against the Jacksonville Jaguars and plays hurt against the Lions. And after the season, he said, look, my knee was not 100% really the whole year. And I just said on Locked On Packers, the show that the daily show that I host on the Packers the other day, he needs to learn how to play better through injury. Every quarterback has to learn how to do that. Joe Burrow is someone who we saw him hurt a couple years ago, did not play well. It affected him in a lot of ways. Patrick Mahomes has sort of learned how to play hurt. The best players have to be able to do that. And he did not play at the same level last year. Really a turnover-worthy play problem. He was a little more reckless with the ball, I think because he couldn't move. He is the kind of player who wants to make every throw because he can make every throw. He does not get sacked. One of the lowest pressure to sack guys in the NFL. When you pressure him, he's not going to take a sack. He's going to try and make a throw. Last year, that led to some weirdness. And I think we over-index some of the weirdness. You remember the pick six maybe against the Rams where he's falling literally sideways and tries to throw the ball out of bounds. Doesn't get enough on it. It goes right to a Rams linebacker for a pick six. He's the pick six against the Lions on a screenplay. Watch that play, guys. He can barely move. That was right after the groin injury. That was the first game after the groin injury in the rain. He's trying to get the ball to Josh Jacobs on a screen. It's off target for whatever reason. Kirby Joseph is kind of like hiding behind Zach Tom and makes this incredible play, returns it for 6. I think we over-index sometimes on those plays that look really bad because by and large, it's not a problem for him. Like if you look at his career turnover-worthy play rate, it's right in between Jalen Hurts and Jared Goff, who are guys that we consider take care of the football kind of quarterbacks. I think because he can do crazy things and will occasionally do crazy things, we think of him as this reckless guy. He's not really. But he's got to, I think, tighten. Even from there, he can tighten it up from what we saw last year.
Peter, one of the key stats for me that causes a lot of deception amongst the value of quarterbacks are drop passes.
Oh.
Now, I saw 2 different numbers that said to me that the Packers had at least 30, if not more, drop passes last year. They drafted Matthew Golden, who ran a sub 4.3, when he came out of school in the first round. Clearly, that wide receiver room is going to have to do more to help Jordan Love, won't they?
Yeah, and the Warren Sharp football stats, they put out a number that on they call it receiver error. So whether it's wrong routes, whether it's a drop, the Packers led the NFL in value lost to receiver error last year. And on third down, no one lost more value than the Packers, than Jordan Love on receiver error. And Jordan Love didn't even play 2 games, guys. Didn't even play. and he still led the league in lost value on third down. You go back to like that Lions game I mentioned. Yes, Jordan Love had that weird pick six. There were 4, 5, maybe 6, depending on how you're charting it, drops in that game, including one in the end zone. And all of them were on third down. That just can't happen. And so they play this egalitarian style of offense where it's, it's sort of the Warriors basketball, the ball finds energy style of offense. The open guy gets the ball, right? But on 3rd and 8, what is the play? And it's kind of either Matt LaFleur has to scheme something up perfectly, or Jordan Love has to make a play and get them in the right, has to kind of do the Joe Burrow thing where it's like, I got to read everything out and make sure I know exactly what the defense is doing. And then even if I put the ball right on the numbers for someone, Dontavian Wicks led the league in drops last year. Jaden Reed, 3rd in drop rate last year. Now those guys for their careers are not high drop players, but Dontavian Wicks, for example, had a good drop rate his junior year and then led the nation in drops his senior year. He's a volatile player in terms of catching the football, which is a problem when your job is to catch the football. So yeah, it's not surprising they bring in Matthew Golden. They bring in Savion Williams from TCU, who is this tantalizing bucket of tools, 6'4", 200 pounds, 96th percentile speed score, ran in the low 4.4s for a guy that size. I mean, he is a freak of nature. His highlight reel, guys, like just if you want to spend a fun 4 minutes, just YouTube Savion Williams highlights.
Oh yeah.
You will think he should have been a first round pick if you just watch the highlights. They are incredible, but down to down, guess what? Consistency was a problem. So I found that pick particularly interesting because I'm like, this is kind of like the receivers they already have. Tantalizing size, speed guys with inconsistencies. But Wicks, last year of his deal, Reed going into, they're going to want contracts next offseason. So, that's part of why we saw that. They are going to have to get better play out of those guys. I think one name that I'll give to you here is they have talked, Jordan Love has spoken about in the spring, getting the ball to Tucker Kraft, the tight end, more. He led all tight ends last year in yards after catch per reception. There was a point in time, even into December of last year, I think it was like 9.6 yards after catch per reception. So throw him the ball, he's getting a first down, like every time. And that's after the catch. So they want to find more ways to get him the ball. He said the spring work that he wanted to do into the summer was winning one-on-one matchups. So I've got a linebacker or a safety. Let me beat them one-on-one. Let me find ways to shake them, to get open, to use my body, those types of things. I think you're going to see Tucker Kraft become a bigger part of this offense because when they featured him, he was outstanding. Go back, watch that Rams game in LA. I mean, he looked like George Kittle in that game. And that was when I started to go, wait a second. There's something here that I did not realize that they had. And I think they felt the same way about that. They went, whoa, whoa, whoa. We got to get this guy the ball more.
Yes, just sticking with that wide receiver room for a second. Last year, that group, it seemed like it was kind of crowded between Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Wicks, Melton. And then the Packers go and do something that they did not do once with Aaron Rodgers under center, which is take a wide receiver in round 1, and then they doubled down and took another one in round 3. So now they're, at least 6 bodies in that wide receiver room at the top of the depth chart. How is playing time and touches going to kind of be split between all those guys?
Well, Christian Watson's going to start the year in all likelihood on PUP. ACL injury in week 17 or week 18. How many weeks are in the season again, guys? The final week of the season last year. And so he seems to be ahead of schedule, but Matt LaFleur sort of downplayed the, hey, maybe he could be back early stuff. I would expect him to start on PUP. That's 4 weeks now instead of 6. Remember, it used to be longer. So I would expect him back sooner than later. But this is a team that always liked to rotate guys. That's just what they've been. I also would not be surprised if one of these guys gets moved between now and week 1. There was already a little bit priming of the pump. Albert Breer had a story in MMQB probably 6 weeks ago now, very early. Like we'd been at spring camp for like 5.5 minutes, and all of a sudden it's like Packers love Matthew Golden. Like, look out, there could be a trade in here. And I was like, that made my antenna perk up a little bit. I'm like, the Packers have not seen enough Matthew Golden in person to make a decision like that. That to me was like, let's chum the waters a little bit. Let's see who calls on this. I had been told earlier in the offseason that the Packers had discussed a Romeo Doubs trade as part of a different set of moves last year. Remember, Romeo Doubs' old quarterback now plays in Pittsburgh. They could use a wide receiver too after trading George Pickens. So there could be some opportunities here if Matthew Golden looks better than expected, if Savion Williams shows more progress than expected. It is a crowded room, but again, Christian Watson's going to start the year hurt, and you can never have too many bodies. This is a team that at the end of last year, in that Eagles playoff game, Christian Watson goes out the week before, torn ACL, just tough luck, right? But then in that Eagles game, Romeo Doubs gets hurt in that game, and then Jaden Reed gets hurt in that game. They're throwing like gotta have it passes on fourth down to Malik Heath, who is someone that your audience think I just made up. And I promise I didn't. And Bo Melton late in the fourth quarter is getting heaves. And it's just like, that can't be what your team looks like. Depth is the superpower of the 2025 Green Bay Packers because they don't have the same number of elite players as some of these other teams. I'm not even sure they have as many blue chip players as the Giants. But I expect the Packers, because of their depth, because of the overall quality, that's what they've leaned into here, and it's worked for them.
Peter, I have 30 seconds to ask you about the defense. Jair Alexander is now with the Ravens, but that's a solid defensive core all around. How much will they miss him? Again, we only have about 30 seconds.
It was not a problem last year. He played half a season, and the Packers were a top 10 defense. They win because they don't have any holes, not because they have elite talent. And coverage is a weak link system. You are as good as your worst player, not as good as your best player, and that was the Packers to a T last year. They're just solid everywhere. And Xavier McKinney, sorry guys, Xavier McKinney was a superstar last year for the Packers.
He
is the eraser back there. He makes that defense go.
All right. Peter Bukowski from The Leap, where can people get your work?
So Locked On Packers daily podcast, check us out there. The Leap is a daily newsletter during the season. It's 5 days a week. And then go check out Locked On Sports Today. It's our all sports flagship show on the Locked On Podcast Network. All sports. So it's like the first 15 minutes of Sports Center. Get all your sports stories, get caught up on. If you're a big Giants fan, okay, we got other sports, other stuff to get you caught up on in the morning. It's your morning sports page because no one reads the newspaper anymore.
Peter, thanks for your time. We'll see you during the season.
Thanks, Paul.
Peter.